All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Bright-eyed, almost. It's the media business, so I know mornings aren't comfortable for many of you. We don't have a lot of time today, so we're going to get through with the formalities quite quickly. The conflicts. This panel will not be general puffery. It will not be just about bragging about all of our businesses. We hope to have enough meat and bones on this so that there can be a great discussion and to give you an opportunity to ask questions. My name is Jay Switzer. I used to be a broadcaster. Many of us used to be broadcasters. We're now media executives. Today, and I know half the reason you guys are here is not only to talk about and hear about the successes and challenges of getting series to air and this phenomenon that we've kind of come across where after the writer strike from 4 or 5 years ago, poof, snap your fingers, and there are more than a dozen not only shot in Canada television programs, but Canadian content television programs finding their way, usually successfully, onto U.S. cable channels and U.S. networks. How did it happen? What the heck is going on? Are there any secrets? Are these just great deals, or are they also great shows? And today, to discuss this, both strengths and challenges, we have the three best, brightest, most powerful, and certainly handsome and beautiful panel.
How much did you pay him?
We're not going to do any boring speeches. I will introduce them briefly, and we will try to keep this as conversational so we can get right to the meat of the matter. A little bit of conflict for me in case it comes up. I'm involved, chair and co-founder. By the way, we're being streamed today. For those of you that are listening or want to, the master website is NATPE.org. It's being streamed live, and it'll be available later for download. And of course, from a formality point of view, we truly want to thank, on behalf of all of the Canadians and all the stakeholders, NATPE for its interest in Canada. It's been a friend of Canada for many years. The Canadian attendance at NATPE has always exceeded our weight in the business. We thank Rick Feldman and the entire team for allowing us to do this. And of course, just any time you have any challenges, just remember NATPE is a not-for-profit organization to serve its stakeholders. Unlike some other associations around the world in Europe and the south of France, they're just interested in your pocketbook. You know, once you've lost your room at MIP, what the hell, you got nothing to lose. With us today is a fantastic panel. Arguably, I wanted to finish the conflicts, we'll get out of the way. The company I'm involved with very deeply is a brand new suite of channels. I'll keep this to 30 seconds. It's called Hollywood Suite, S-U-I-T-E. The website, hollywoodsuite.ca. If you guys want to tweet any questions to me, by the way, and you're too embarrassed to ask them personally, you can tweet them to me. My hashtag is SwitzerJ, S-W-I-T-Z-E-R-J-A-Y. And the email, if any of you disagree violently with what I'm saying today, I take responsibility for all opinions. It's j.switzer@hollywoodsuite.ca. I'm also privileged to be on the board of Paul Bronfman's White's, Comweb's WF White equipment rental business. I'm on the board of Canada's gay and lesbian channel Out TV, and I'm privileged to be on the board of Christina Jennings' production company Shaftesbury Films, arguably the second largest and most talented production company in Canada after John's E1. With us today, John Morayniss, the head, the CEO of the television division of E1, Canadian, lawyer, experienced history with McCarthy Tetro, Alliance Atlantis, his own company rolled up into E1. He runs the show out of LA. For many years, and please ask him very tough questions because he's the man. We have two of Canada's most talented and most powerful broadcasters with us. Barb Williams heads up Shaw Media, certainly all the content and creative matters at Shaw Media. She works for a wonderful gentleman named Paul Robertson. He relies on her to run the whole show. They are Canada's largest, we call them specialty channels in Canada. You guys call them cable channels. Barb has a long history with the predecessor company, CanWest Global, and before that, Alliance Atlantis. She's one of the most talented media executives in the country. And for those of you that are into selling, not only do they commission new series, but they spend hundreds of millions of dollars in Hollywood every year. I see my studio sales friends sit up. Beside her, an equally talented and powerful media executive, former broadcaster, is Phil King. Phil King is a fellow graduate of the University of Western Ontario. He's been in the business a very long time. He's known for molding, building, and creating arguably the single best, most respected specialty channel in Canada. TSN, the sports network. Phil is long ago a CA by training. He is a former broadcaster media executive, and for the last year, or a little less than a year, with the reorganization in Canada, has been responsible for everything that is CTV, Canada's still largest and strongest broadcaster, as well as TSN, now owned by Bell Media. So that's 3 minutes. I have some questions. We're going to keep this conversational. Yeah, I gotta, see, I can be really tough with Barb and Phil as kind of former competitors, but with John, I gotta be a little nicer because my wife, who's an actress, Ellen Dubin, is working for John this week, so I gotta rip this up.
Thank God.
Maybe we'll start with John. And you know, I had it all digital, but I'm still in the BlackBerry family, and the playbook is only 7 inches, and I got to go to the iPad. The playbook wasn't big enough for this, so I apologize for the paper. John, you've had a successful LA base, a main office and Toronto offices in Europe. You seem to have mastered the magic of getting an early look at the best creative, the best opportunities, and finding the perfect home for each project. With the right international broadcaster and with the right Canadian broadcaster. There are failures, of course, but also many great hits. You produced in Western Canada, Central Canada, Eastern Canada. I presume most of the time for creative reasons and some of the time for tax and financing reasons, and you have legitimate relationships with the best broadcasters around the world. Are you worried or excited from a Canada point of view at the trends you see with Bell Media and Shaw Media in terms of their content needs going forward, and are you excited or fearful at the next business cycle?
I'm always excited. I think that obviously there's some dramatic changes that have gone on and will continue to go on in the media space in every sense of the word, from the demands of media buyers to fragmentation in the marketplace, to complex windowing, to competition from digital platforms. But I think as a producer and an exploiter of content where we are platform agnostic, there's always opportunities. And as you mentioned in your preamble, never before has there been more opportunities to utilize and create Canadian programming originating in Canada, developed with Canadian broadcasters, where there's been a willingness and openness, not just in the U.S. market, but also internationally with some of the largest broadcasters in the largest territories to come in and co-develop, co-produce, co-finance. So I'm excited. There's a lot. It's way more complicated now than it's ever been. I'm sure, Barb and Phil will speak to that. But it's those challenges also create opportunities for anyone in the content creation business, content ownership business. What's also interesting is obviously the broadcasters now looking for additional revenue streams. It's not just the old, ad revenue sub fees. They also want to have ownership, and I don't look at that as a bad thing because our business is about partnership. So if there's a way for them if we can figure out a model where we can deliver them content program that works for their platforms, at the same time gives them more upside, gets them more invested. I actually see that not as a liability. I see that actually as an asset.
For those of you that don't know in the room, John's firm is active in very many areas, but very successful with cable shows such as Haven, and associated with Rookie Blue, associated with NBC's John Grisham's The Firm, of course, and a very long list. So I'm interested. He's the bellwether of what things. Before I ask Barb and Phil, if you had a chance to tell the powers that be in Ottawa and give them some advice about making things better from your point of view, what advice would you give them?
It's a tough one because, again, a lot of this is going to be very self-serving. The rules, the regulatory system has really built substantial and talented infrastructure in Canada on the production side and the creative side. It's really built some strong companies. But I think we're at the next level where I think there has to be sort of a rethinking and a greater flexibility in the rules, because Canadian content is being sold, exploited around the world. It's being seen and viewed by audiences around the world. And companies have grown in the production sector in Canada significantly. But if you look at the companies with real studio-style infrastructure, other than E1, there are no other companies in Canada that exist. So I believe, and we can get into this a little more, that the rules somehow have to support more the building of companies that are well capitalized, that just don't have a production infrastructure, but also have a distribution infrastructure, a better capability to finance and take risks. So I think there's still a very risk-averse mentality in Canada. And just generally the content that's coming to Canada, if we just could tweak the rules a little bit to create a little more creative flexibility, some of these shows would
John is
prosper.
politely kind of describing the trade-offs. For those of you that kind of understand how it works, let's just take a typical drama. There's, and please don't quote me on the exact numbers, but let's say there's a series being shot and it's got a budget of $2 million. To a great extent, that can come out of Canada. The various funds, credits, and there are 100 different models that these experts, are way better than I am at. Some are co-financing, some are treaty co-productions, some are simply tax credits, some are very visibly Canadian productions that involve the Canadian Media Fund, and there are literally, in total, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of direct or indirect subsidies one way or another available. Why does it happen? Why is all this money available in Canada? And to kind of summarize it in 30 seconds, for those that may not understand it, because we live next to arguably the most powerful culture force in the world, it is a matter of public policy that even if Canadians don't watch yet a lot of Canadian drama, there should be support for it, so that our next generation knows as much about Canadian premiers and prime ministers as they do about governors and American presidents. And so while the policy can't force tuning, it can supplement budgets, and so you end up with a model where perhaps, and I'm being unfair, I'm not trying to pry, the Canadian license fee for this 1-hour drama is perhaps $600,000. There's perhaps $500,000 or $600,000 of various tax credits, subsidies, and funds available, taking it to $1.2 million. Maybe international is a couple of $100,000, and the American network can buy an original new 1-hour dramatic series for $200,000 or $300,000. Again, these are orders of magnitude. These guys might be squirming, but that's what's happened, and there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars available. Now, what John is politely saying is that if he were to be giving advice to the powers that be in the governments in Canada, he's saying make it more creative. Don't make the demands on that as difficult as it is, although some would argue that there's balance. If you're going to get access to those funds, there should be a certain requirement of Canadian above-the-line and below-the-line talent. It all kind of started back with the writer's strike, I guess, when CBS kind of panicked and gave the extraordinary series Flashpoint an early break. But to just kind of do a snapshot of what's on the air this year, last year, that's coming out of Canada, and we're not including the shows that are shot in Canada that have nothing to do with any of these systems. Excellent shows like Fringe, which is shot in Canada, or Once Upon a Time, and so on. I presume they're taking advantage of some small U.S. service credits, but not necessarily...
Or J. Hell on Wheels, which
Hell on Wheels,
which is shot in Canada, but not Canadian content.
Correct. Hell on Wheels, E1, shot in Canada, gets some production credits, but it is not sucking at the teat, as they would say, of these giant subsidies. But just look at the list. It's not just CW buying LA Complex, a fantastic Bell Media Much Music show. Some have been successful, some have not. But you go down the list and realize, from Haven to The Bridge, Transporter that's coming, Call Me Fitz, 13, Jay Firestone's Lost Girl on Sci-Fi, The Listener, Combat Hospital, Rookie Blue, the Treaty Co-Prods, The Borgias, and The Tudors, the New Copper, the controversial Kennedys down here, not to mention the hundreds of MOWs that have been shot as Canadian content for networks like Lifetime and Hallmark, who have kept everybody busy. There is something going on because the Canadian dollar that used to be at 65 cents is now to par. So it isn't because of the dollar exchange, it's because networks are, and this is just my personal view, U.S. cable networks and conventional networks are realizing that they can get 80 or 90% of the show that they want for 20% of the cost. Let's go to Barb. At Shaw Media, its main network global, you have, I wrote this and I mean this, the best job in the world. Head of all content, including the powerful national brand Global and large portfolio of the most powerful and successful entertainment lifestyle channels, very big in lifestyle, with networks such as Food Network, History, HG, Action, Diva, Showcase, and so on. And you have been at the helm through previous ownerships and this brand new start under Shaw Media. And there seems to be some real momentum in terms of some of your ratings gains, and you've come through a tougher time and things look much better. Perhaps more than others in Canada, you and your teams seem to be aggressively developing or joining Canadian series that have found partners and exposure elsewhere, and I've just mentioned some of them. And of course there will be some failures and some successes, but why has Shaw taken this more aggressive approach towards development, and what have you learned? And how would you describe to producers in the room that are anxious to get part of your action? No pitches are welcome here. We're talking 30,000 feet, or as we say in Canada, 10,000 meters. What would you describe to producers and distributors in the room as your sweet spot for what Shaw is looking for in terms of approaching you?
Well, that's about a half hour worth of answer, I think. First of all, yes, I have the best job in the world. There's absolutely no doubt about that. We are so much further along, I think, in our understanding of what the creative community in Canada can now do and who it can do it with and how it can pull it off. I would support what John was saying, that all these rules, although some days they feel challenging, I think they have built an infrastructure in Canada that we're enormously proud of and also being very successful with. And actually, plug for the CRTC, I don't think we'd have it if all those rules hadn't been there. One of the reasons why I think we're so much more successful with all this than we were is because that simple reason. We just have better writers, better directors, better showrunners than we ever did, and we have enough of them now that there's a mass of talent there now that they, even if you put them all together before, you could run one series at a time. We now have so much talent across Canada that we can share that talent across networks and across platforms and with international partners. I think for us, when we try the US dollar game, and that's really, trying to access financing to make a show bigger and better. And there's a cut of shows that really benefit from that. Not every show needs it, but some do. And there's a cut of shows that fit with a certain brand that has a close enough fit with the US brand that the show can truly be successful on both sides. And I think what we're very careful about and what that sweet spot is that it's not just any show, hope to somehow sell it to somebody in the US and get an extra buck in it, but it's to be really thoughtful about where our brand can really line up with theirs so that the show can truly be successful for both partners. Rookie Blue is a perfect example. Rookie Blue is a perfect brand fit for global and absolutely lines up with who ABC is and what they're looking for. And Rookie Blue might not have been as successful on any other network other than ABC, and that's why we're going into season 3 with that one, and it's been a huge hit for both sides of the border. I think Haven, perfect for showcase, perfect for sci-fi, a real fit there from a brand point of view. And then you get both networks really supporting the creative that's behind the great financing. There's tons of content we do that doesn't require or doesn't fit this model. The global schedule right now has a number of big Canadian shows on it. Bomb Girls is pure Canada. 100% Canadian financing, doesn't have an American or any other international partner, and is very successful on the global schedule. And then a couple, the next night we have The Firm, which is one of these American models. So I think it's about being thoughtful about why you want a show to go in the US, and do you have the right brand fit to really support the right storytelling so that it can be successful both sides.
I should congratulate the senior development people who are in charge of commissioning all new Canadian programs. Have just been awarded major Canadian Women in Communications awards. Christine and Corey, both in Shaw Media and in Bell Media, are kind of Women of the Year, and it's I congratulate both of you. And Phil, what I should be asking you is why Haven isn't on Space, but that's for another question. I know it's on sci-fi-ish channels all around the world except in Canada. For those of you that just kind of want some of the metrics, there are approximately 8 or 9 million English television homes, and with great respect to the French community in Canada, we're talking about English primarily. There are another 3.5 million or so French homes in Canada. The ad spend in Canada on conventional television, again, this is order of magnitude, approximately $2 billion. On specialty, approximately $1 billion out of a total pool of maybe $6 billion in total, including all advertising, all media, including search and radio and everything else. The spend There's a required spend on Canadian, and for American and international friends would understand, American friends wouldn't. Why is there this whole thing about Canadian content anyway, and why does it create this artificial supply-demand? Barb did, Global and Shaw Media did an unbelievable job promoting the firm. It way overperformed the U.S. numbers. I don't know, you had 1.2 million or 1.3 million viewers in Canada, average audience, which is, you know, anything north of 1 million is a legitimate huge hit. These broadcasters are required by regulation to have a certain number of hours and spend a certain amount of dollars on Canadian. And so to get the best in terms of supply-demand, it raises prices. It creates a kind of a stressful situation where in the US, 3 out of 4 shows will fail. In Canada, we're not large enough and there isn't enough money in the system to kind of allow that. Those are the kind of fundamentals of what the market's like. They will spend, each of Shaw Media and Bell Media, and again I'm summarizing, probably in the order of $150 to $200 million every year in Hollywood on license fees. I'm excluding sports. Rogers, of course, is another major player. They're not here today. And in the specialty world, Chorus, of course, is a large player as well. Maybe we'll get on to Phil for a second, and we do want to have time to open questions from the floor, and we want to get into, you know, some challenging things. This isn't about stuff you already know. Phil, you've been at this job not that long in terms of your new responsibilities. You are known and respected, and I believe this, I wrote it, as a true media leader in Canada, and you've earned the right to lead the largest, most successful family of brands in Canada, including the #1 rated CTV network, and Canada's leading sports network, TSN. You've only formally been responsible for the conventional networks, CTV and CTV2, for less than a year. In programming terms, please be honest with us and tell us what you've learned in your first year leading CTV, what works, what doesn't work, and how are you staying ahead of the reality today that viewers are increasingly wanting to watch what they want, when they want, however they want, and you're interested in serving those needs but not cannibalizing the mothership. What have you learned and what's going on?
Well, what I've learned is I think the odds are greater in Vegas than they are in Hollywood and trying to find a hit. It's not like sports. You know, you buy 10 football games, you know what you got. But what I've learned, I guess we're really talking about the Canadian production as opposed to you know, buying Hollywood studio shows. There's lots and lots of ways to finance them. There's the big shows, there's smaller shows for specialty. There is no one model, and we're open to all different models, different financing models. But if I could speak specifically about CTV, we want and need the big budget, big cost episodes, primarily because, you know, when I grew up, if you mentioned the word Canadian television, people shuddered and went, oh, with the one light bulb and you can see the boom mic dangling in the background. You know, that's been erased for the last 10 years, and it is great quality, you know, and if you grab an average person on the street, and if you don't tell them it's a Canadian show, they won't know the difference. You know, what Barb does in some of her shows, and the Flashpoints and the Borges, the quality is just as good as coming out of Hollywood. So, you know, I came in maybe predisposed to the other side of that, and thinking the Canadian stuff was a tax, and, you know, if you'd rather not do it, but that's not true. I can assure you that we are constantly out on the look for a Canadian show. It has so many other benefits for us in our schedule. If we can create another Flashpoint, another Corner Gas, the flexibility of scheduling is just so important for us. You know, like Jay said, is, you know, we sit beside the U.S. and you know, NBC and ABC, they're basically in as many homes as CTV and Global, and nowhere around the world they have to, frankly, put up with this. and it makes it challenging because, you know, you think you have a schedule. We're not really schedulers in Canada. We kind of a little bit slave to the U.S. schedules, and we try to find, to our best ability, a time slot that works and supports the Canadian show. But we're doing some little tests now. We're doing the LA Complex we did. That was not a CTV show, but we deliberately debuted and simulcast it on a Tuesday night to give it, and we knew it wouldn't get a big number on CTV. It did about 500,000 viewers. But the idea was to send those 500,000 viewers over to Much Music for the following week.
It was created for Much Music, was it?
It was,
I think?
yeah, it was.
And it's been sold to CW for the summer, I guess.
That's right. So, obviously the kind of bar, the CTV bar, much like Global, it needs 1 million viewers to be considered a success, realistically. Anything below that, it's going to be challenging to bring back unless we really feel it's so good it was our scheduling or our marketing that caused it and it wasn't the show itself. So it needs to get to that level. But in specialty, if it can even average 100,000 viewers on Much Music, that'll be a big success and we'll be happy with that. I've learned there's just different ways of doing things. As far as, viewers wanting to watch TV everywhere, I guess that's the buzzword now. But I've also learned TV everywhere also means free TV everywhere. Since that's what they really want, that's probably the biggest challenge. But Bell, that's the great news about Bell buying CTV. They're extremely aggressive, and I would argue maybe the most aggressive of the BDU kind of telco companies. You can see the CTV channel on a phone now. Have we cleared all the rights for every show? No. Will we ever? I suppose we will one day. But it's getting very close. I'm working with a lot of our studio partners, and they're kind of coming along for the ride. Because, you explain it one or two ways is nobody really knows what it's worth. That's the hardest thing right now. I mean, you can argue it's $10 or $1, and all I know is we'll both be wrong.
What about your sweet spot, Phil? If I were to ask you the same thing, how would you describe
what we're looking for?
What you're looking for, not specifically, but generally speaking? Are you looking for narrow-driven, particular genre ideas and shows, or are you looking for mass appeal, national, play everywhere kinds of shows?
Yeah, well, on CTV, we need mass appeal. It needs to reside among the Grey's Anatomies and the American Idols and all the big American shows that frankly bring in the lion's share of our ad revenue. So it has to be able to fit with those shows. All things equal, I think we'll be a little biased today towards comedies. We do not have a Canadian comedy that can work internationally on our network. We had tremendous success with Corner Gas for 6 years, and we didn't end it. Brett Butt did. We'd still be doing it today if you wanted to. And then we had two other comedies, Hiccups and Dan for Mayor, that weren't as successful, frankly. Excuse me. So we need another one. They're gold. If we can get one that we control the scheduling, and Barb will speak to this, when you buy a comedy in the U.S., it's only half an hour time slot, so you need something else to pair with it in the hour. And often, you don't have, just the way the deals work, you don't have it. We have the biggest show in Canada, Big Bang Theory, 8 o'clock Thursdays. We need to put a show at 8:30. Barb has got the 8:30 show, and she'd probably love to have an 8 o'clock show to pair with it. So if we can create a Canadian comedy or anything that we can schedule and not be have to follow the kind of leader with what the U.S. does, that is gold for us. So we're very predisposed to trying to find a Canadian comedy. I think CBC's launched a few, and I think they've done a good job.
Yeah, I should give CBC a lot of credit. There are a lot of challenges. I think all of us believe that the CBC has an important role to play. This is our public broadcaster that is commercially driven in English Canada, gets in total $1 billion of government support. That's from 36 million people. That's pretty serious. It's run by Kirsten Stewart, and they've launched Arctic Air and a bunch of other things. It's like changing a big ocean liner and slowly turning it. But I must publicly give Kirsten and CBC a lot of credit for starting to find themselves. I think we all agree. We might define it differently, but that it's a good thing if the CBC finds itself for Canada.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, maybe they'll get out of hockey.
I won't talk about competition in sports and movies and hockey.
But, outside of a comedy, a procedural, where we find it tough on CTV, giving our scheduling challenges, to do a serialized drama. We did The Borgias. Again, that was really designed more for cable. We did run it because on CTV after. I remember one of my first decisions when I knew nothing, and I knew slightly more now. Where do we air it? Do we debut it on Bravo? Does CTV do it? I think in the old days we would have went for the high ratings and said it's going on CTV. We need all the audience we can get, and we'll give the leftovers, i.e. the repeats, to Bravo. So I breathed deep and I let Bravo kind of take it. And then CTV ran it as an encore in the summer. So you'll see it, that wouldn't have happened perhaps a couple of years ago, but you'll see us mixing and matching, and I'm not afraid to use CTV as the megaphone to help create a hit. Perhaps, again, knowingly take a hit in the ratings for 1 hour. To me, that's a marketing cost. That's just a marketing cost to make these things go. Because the beauty of having CTV being as large as it is, we'll get sampling. We're going to get sampling, and then it's up to the show to deliver. You know,
Yeah,
so,
promo's always easier when a network is hot and things work. By the way, I should mention that for producers that have smaller ideas or other kinds of products, there is a very healthy new next generation of small media players that are anxious and willing, and on behalf of all of them, I should spend 30 seconds on just acknowledging what Jeffrey Elliott, Raja Khan, and Michael McMillan are doing at Glassbox, what our group with David Kimes and Ellen Bain are doing at Hollywood Suite with our Warner Films and MGM Film and so on, what Moses and his gang are doing at Vision. There are what Leonard Aspert is doing with the Fight Network. There is a next gen, as much as the large majors will control 80% of the sandbox, it's just not politically expedient to control 100% of the sandbox. That creates great opportunities for some new voices, both in lifestyle and drama. Smaller, more difficult for you, but there are choices, and on behalf of all of them, these are the biggest and the best, but they're not everything. For those of you that don't know, it was about a year ago or so, plus or minus, that the very large cable company Rogers ended up buying City TV and all that went with it. The powerful Bell Phone Company, BCE, bought CTV and all of its brands. I mentioned Paul Robertson at Shaw that Barb works for. Shaw Media is now owned and controlled by another very large and powerful and talented cable company, Shaw Media, and Shaw Corporate and Shaw Cable. And it is really a battle of the giants. What you've seen in the US in terms of Comcast and its recent transaction is probably, from a market effect point of view, double here in terms of the consolidation and power that these guys have and are using effectively to build up their own businesses. Yes, to support their media businesses, but also to support their larger, more important, I only say more important from a financial point of view, wireless business. Rogers, for example, maybe makes a couple $100 million in their media division, maybe makes $1 billion in their cable division. They make $5 billion a year in their wireless division. And so these things, you know, these former broadcasters, now media executives, all of a sudden know the language of ARPU and all of that kind of stuff. John, do you want to challenge either of these two fine media executives with any question? These are both clients of yours. It's,
Why don't you buy more shows from me?
Could any of you comment on the concerns that we're seeing about the advertising cycle in Canada? There are real challenges coming. This is, again, my own personal opinion. You can go ahead and sue me, but there's no contingency deals. You have to pay for your own lawyer, and all I really have is a Kia, so good luck with that. What are your thoughts on the next short-term business cycle in the next 6 months and the next year through spring and summer and fall? The cycle is very different than it is in the US for a whole bunch of reasons, in part because of elections, in part because we have a much more stable banking system and no crisis there. But the signs I'm seeing reading the tea leaves are frankly quite scary, and although you have conditions of license that require you to do certain things, the healthier you are, the better you are, the better it is for the whole ecosystem, for all stakeholders. Can any of you comment on what you see, excuse me, what you see coming from an advertising cycle point of view, which obviously drives a lot of their business. Much of the business on the cable side, particularly in sports and others, is driven by cable revenue, but advertising is still very important to the main networks.
Yeah, I guess I can speak to it. We had a quite shocking fall. When I meant fall, I don't mean a fall. I meant the autumn.
Both.
The autumn, yeah, maybe. You know, after the 08, and you know that was devastating for all of us. You know, that was worldwide. That wasn't just a Canadian problem. But we were humming along, you know, at CTV, and we were frankly having a fantastic year financially. You know, and then Labor Day came around, and I don't know what happened, to be honest, but the bottom fell out. It really did. Tens and tens of millions just left the industry. And I know it wasn't just us. I know it was, you know, we start to see it in local first. So we have radio stations, we have obviously local affiliates, so you start to see it there, and then it kind of bubbled up. It has come back somewhat. We're cautiously optimistic, I think that's probably the word. You know, Q1, we're on a calendar fiscal year, so our first quarter looks to be in good shape. But it comes fast. I mean, it makes me very nervous, to be honest, seeing what's going on in Europe. Really, it's, you know, it's a joke, but it's true. You know, when America gets sneezes, we get a cold. And talking to lots of people, what can happen is, it's just a size. If pick a company A and you're a multinational and you've got to find $30 million to make your last quarter, to make your year, do you take it from the U.S. budget that probably reaches a lot more people with that $30 million, or do you call up your Canadian VP of marketing going, yeah, I know you're on budget and have a good year, but I need to have that money to make the company whole? And there's no logical reason. Canada's extremely healthy. We don't have low employment. We have good interest rates. We have good banking. Frankly, one of the more stable economies in the world. So it's always shocking to see when that happens but it just kind of shows you we're all connected here, and we're not a little island running it. So, but like I said, I think, crossing our fingers, that was just a short-term blip. And
we're going to have time for one or two questions, but in the meantime, if you guys want to get ready, or if anybody has a question and want to come to the microphone, I'll go through a couple of fact checks. I'm not conflicted in any way, but for those of you that might need help, you're always going to need a great Canadian lawyer to help you with structure, production, tax credit work, and so on. In Canada, I'm trying to be fair, it's probably split 40% Heenan's, 40% Goodman's, and maybe 20% with Mark Lewis. For some of the smaller productions, you will need help. Your work with the guilds and unions across the board, writers, actors, directors, and so on, is really very friendly, very constructive. Yes, rates are comparable, but to be fair, the residual deals and residual clearance costs are much, much lower. And that's been a big help and driving force as well. Other questions before we kind of go to the floor? Oh, you guys are you have them right where you want them. You're letting them off much too easily. I think I've mentioned Rogers very briefly, and because they're not represented here today in the CBC in terms of the work they're doing with City TV. They're headed by Scott Moore and Keith Pelly, and I think they would echo many of the comments. They have fantastic ratings momentum. They're starting from behind. They're growing. They have a new FX channel in Canada and are looking for product. And I think they are respected competitors to these broadcasters, and also good clients for all the top producers. Please, your question.
Sorry, Jay, I just
Yes,
might
Bob.
add, just for completeness here, that the focus so much tends to get to scripted because it's the biggest budget
Good
and the
point.
most challenging to do, and the conversation's always focused in Canada so much around scripted. But these same opportunities are happening in the unscripted side. We're doing these same co-financing opportunities with our partners in the U.S., with HGTV, with Food Network. So there's a big business in Canada for Canadian producers on the unscripted side, and those shows are becoming a much, much bigger business also with American Financing working on their counterpart American channel. So
It goes
it's
without
not
saying,
just a scripted
there's a very
story.
wide and deep history and pride of excellence in terms of lifestyle programming of all kinds, as well as the children's area, which we haven't talked about, from Cookie Jar, Nelvana, and others. Oh my goodness, and my mention of some of the new breaths of fresh air in terms of indies, I totally forgot Cal and Roman and their Channel Zero operation based with CHCH in Hamilton. I respect what you guys are doing too, and you should be included in that list as being a candidate for new purchases. Yes, please. Could you identify yourself and then your question?
Yes, my name is David Florence. Reality TV, the question is, I'm a Canadian but live in the United States, legal Canadian citizen. If I did a co-venture with a Canadian company, is that 100% Canadian? The show would be out of the United States.
Sorry.
Yeah, there's a whole set of rules around how something gets to qualify as Canadian. It sort of centers around the ownership of the copyright and whether that's owned by a Canadian and controlled by a Canadian. And then there's some key, there's a point system with it. If you have to make sure that certain pieces of the budget are Canadian, that you've got key creatives are Canadian, that if it's scripted, you've got leads that are Canadian. So there is a whole, go to the CRTC website and figure it out. Step one is that it be owned as a copyright by a Canadian. So if that's you and you own it, that's step one. But it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, I mean, there's also
Thank you.
rules around development, where did the project initiate, and so on.
Here's how I summarize it. In the U.S., everything is allowed unless there's a rule prohibiting it. In Canada, nothing is allowed unless there's a rule that allows it. Thank you, David. Dom Serafini from Video Age, perhaps our last question as he looks at the clock.
Hi, Jay. This question could be for John or for the broadcasters. I just heard that Canadian laws require broadcasters to air the descriptions of scenes for vision-impaired people. Now, the cost to add this feature is approximately $2,500. Whose responsibility is the broadcaster or John, producer?
Including John.
I'm saying broadcaster, but thanks for asking.
Generally speaking, the producers are responsible, certainly for closed caption expenses and increasingly for described video. By the way, for those of you that are political watchers in the room, I've just got a text that our very good friend Len Katz has been elected acting CRTC chair as Conrad has departed. So how long Vice Chair, now Acting Chair Katz, is in the seat, I think our industry, at least for the interim, is in very good hands. David Fox from David Fox & Associates, now New York-based.
Yes, just a brief comment, not a question, as personal observer of Canadian programming. In 1979, I was working for Don Taffner in the CBC, and I got kicked out of many TV stations in the United States trying to sell King of Kensington and Wayne and Schuster. Fast forward a couple of years, 1981, my partner and I, Richard Lorber, went to visit people at Atlantis. They all had colds. It was March. They didn't have enough money to keep the heat on. They later created CSI. The distance that the Canadian industry has come since then is breathtaking, and I want to compliment you all for that.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Any other final comments from our panel before we shut this down?
I think it's an exciting time to be a Canadian producer, and I think that the rules in Canada, of course, support, because we talked about financing and various models, but at the end of the day, it's still ultimately about the creative. So a great idea is a great idea. And I also would encourage Canadian producers or producers around the world that want to utilize the Canadian system to also look outside, because the U.S. market is actually an extraordinarily large market, and I find sometimes that the rules in Canada become a crutch as opposed to actually a support. And there's sometimes where you can actually, as a Canadian producer, have an idea, sell it, sorry guys, but like sell it in the U.S., shoot it in the United States, sell it back into Canada. These guys will pay a lot of money because at the end of the day, they're buying shows out of Hollywood, and Canadian producers can actually produce around the world, not just in Canada. And I think that sometimes the rules, Jay, also become hindrance to building and growing companies that actually like CSI,
Yep.
which, by the way, it's not.
I want to know who at Disney, what happened to the person at Disney that developed that show?
Because
and then passed
to be
on?
clear, I mean, it wasn't created by a Canadian company, but it was a Canadian company that had the infrastructure and capital to invest and take a risk on that show.
Thank you for reminding us to think big, John.
And that's the important thing is risk-taking. Let's not lose sight of that. It's still, that's what's exciting about what we do, is we take risks, and sometimes they don't pay off, but sometimes they do, and it's fantastic when they do.
Barb or Phil, any last very quick comments?
Yeah, just to pick up on something you said earlier, these are real partnerships. Like, I think we're past the point of simply trying to line up the dollars and hope that no one asks any questions about it. We really are looking for partners to figure out how to put this content on other platforms, to figure out how to measure and monetize that platform viewing, to figure out how to make a show successful into a franchise that lives beyond its first few episodes on the air and just lives up to a rule requirement. We're looking for partners in all of this, and that's when the stuff really wins.
Good reminder. Phil?
Yeah, I'd echo that. I mean, we're looking for series going to be around 4 or 5 years, just like when we buy the shows in Hollywood. There is no difference. We want the quality. We want a vision of where the series is going. Pitching a pilot with no idea what will happen in season 2 is probably not going to fly. We're really going to push you to say, where do you see the story going? Where do you see the character development? That's what we want to see. It's expensive and it costs a lot to market these and get them into the schedule. So it's heartbreaking when all the hard work goes and then it fizzles out after 5 or 6 because it lost its way.
It's a good reminder. It's often considered a little disrespectful to talk about another panel. NATPE is first and foremost our destination to get together. I do want to let you know that this discussion continues at the second best show in the world in Banff, in the mountains, the most beautiful place in the world. I'm not conflicted in any way. I just love meeting you all there. Banff in June. We hope to see you there. It is the second best programmers. It is a special day today. It is the birthday of the second best programmer in this room, Ellen Bain. I did not want to let this day go without acknowledging that. Thank you all for attending, and have a good rest of NATPE.